Hi everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Stitch Sessions. We are going to tackle a duster cardigan project, or what I like to call a sweater coat. Now this is going to be a two-part tutorial, and today we're going to work on the main panels, and we're going to be using that wonderful X's and O's stitch, and you saw that done a while back on another project. And if you saw our wedding bells tutorial on the trapezoid shaped shawl, you'll know that we also used that stitch as part of that gorgeous texture that we created there. Now, if you're new here, my name is Karen, and I love all things to do with crochet and crafting with crochet. And so welcome, and if you're not new here, welcome back. It's great to have you, and I hope you guys are ready to dive into a fun new project. It is going to take a little bit of time, and but I think you're going to really love the end result. Now, I made this one with the Hygge yarn by Red Heart, and it is a little bit on a thicker side, but it is fairly lightweight for a bulky 5 yarn, and it is utterly soft. It's amazing, and it is a perfect yarn and fiber for early spring, which we're in now. So up here in Toronto, it's still a bit chilly in the daytime, so this would make for a great outside coat just before things warm up as the summer comes on. So let's dive right in and check out all the materials we're going to need to create our project. Okay, let's get started. So to make our duster, we are going to need anywhere between 5 to 6 skeins of this Red Heart Hygge yarn. This is the yarn that I'm using for this project. It is considered a bulky size 5. If you're using a medium 4-weight yarn, then you may have to use more. It all depends if you want to make your duster a little bit longer. I'm actually going to do about mid-length, so probably just above my knees. So that means the length of this sweater is going to go from my shoulder to just above my knee height, okay? And so just so you're, in case you're wondering, this color is called Pearl. And I just love it because it's got this kind of funny little fuzz, which normally I'm not crazy about, but I love it in this color, and it's just going to be perfect to wear as a layered garment. And it is, if I can find it, 70% acrylic and 30% nylon. You machine wash it cold on gentle cycle and tumble dry on low. So in case you're going to use the same yarn, that's all the info for that. They are recommending a 6.5 millimeter hook, but for this project, I am actually going to use a 9 millimeter hook, also known as a size N. And the reason why I'm doing that is I want this garment to sit really I want it to drape really nice. I want the stitches to sit nice and loose and loopy and drapey. So I am using a size 9. Admittedly, it is not a common size. In fact, this is a hook that I found at my parents' place when I used to crochet as a teenager, and I was very happy to find it. If you could use a size 8 or a size 10, really is totally up to you. As always, you want to make sure that you have a handy pair of, a handy pair of scissors on hand, and then later on, we're going to need a darning needle to sew in your ends. So let's get started. I'm so excited about using this yarn. Okay, so what we want to keep in mind is that we are going to make this garment in 3 panels. You're going to have the back panel and then the 2 side front panels. So these are the panels that are going to come down the front. So what we're going to start off with is your back panel. Essentially, you're just making 3 long rectangles. The main thing you want to keep in mind is measurements, the length and the width. So for me, I know my length, so we are going to work our project lengthwise, up and down this way. Some people will work their sweater from the bottom, for example, and then work their way up, and that's just another way of doing it. In this particular project, I'm going to start from one side of the back panel and work my way across to the other side, okay? So I know for me, my measurement is 35 inches, that would make it 89 centimeters. So I am typically a size medium to large, depending on the style of the garment. So what we want to do is we're going to start off by chaining a foundation chain length up to 35 inches. So that would be for me, whatever your length is for you. You want to do a chain of that length. That's going to give you that length, okay? So we're going to start with a slip knot. And then we're simply going to chain however many chains you need to reach the length you desire and you need for your particular size. Now I want you to notice something too. So part of the reason why I picked such a large hook, which I know I've already mentioned, is I wanted the stitches to sit loosely, but on top of that, I am also purposely stitching fairly relaxed. It's so easy during this first chain row to crochet tight, and then it creates a bunching at the one end of your work. So really try your best to be nice and relaxed with the chain. The other technique you can do is if you are chaining with the 9mm hook, for example, then I would go down to an 8mm hook for the rest of your work. So that will kind of guarantee that your chain row, your first chain row, won't be tighter than the rest of your work. But I'm going to leave that completely up to you. So go ahead and do that, and I will meet you once you've reached your desired length. So for me, that's going to be 35 inches or 89 centimeters. Okay, so I have my chain length that I need here, and my number of stitches actually is 93. And one thing I did forget to mention is that you will need a multiple of 3. So whatever length you need, just make sure you can divide that number by 3. So for me, I have 93 stitches, and that can definitely be divided by 3. Once you have the number of stitches in multiples of 3 that you need, we want to chain an additional 1. This is going to give me 94 stitches in total. And this is important based on the pattern we're going to create on our panel. Okay, so I have 94 stitches. Once you have your stitch count, multiples of 3 plus the additional 1, we now want to chain an additional 1. Okay, so this is going to be part of our stitch. So it has nothing to do with the number of stitches. Once you've chained your additional 1, you're going to skip 2 stitches, and into the 3rd stitch, we're going to do a half double crochet. So you'll yarn over, insert into that 3rd stitch or the 3rd chain, pull through. You'll have 3 loops on your hook. You'll yarn over and pull through all 3. And this project requires a lot of super relaxed and easygoing stitching. And I'm going to do that all the way to the end. So into the very next stitch, I will insert, whoops, I forgot to yarn over. So you're going to yarn over, insert your hook, yarn over to pull through, and then resolve the half double crochet stitch. Okay, so what we did there, that additional 1 that we chained at the end, so that chain 1 that we did at the top there, that these 2 stitches will count as a stitch. Okay, so we'll talk about that when we get to that end. But for now, we're going to continue on 1 half double crochet into each chain stitch all the way across. So I should have, for me, still 94 stitches at the end of that row. So this is row 1 of our pattern, working the back panel of our cardigan. So I will meet you at the end of round 1. Okay, so once you have done 1 half double crochet into each chain all the way around, or all the way across, I should say, you should have something that looks like this on the front, and then the back looks like that. Okay, so In fact, this first row 1 will not be part of the regular repeat pattern. I like to call this the establishing row. Some people would call it the full foundation row. So this will become much more apparent later on when we're sewing our panels together. So we have an establishing row at the beginning and we're going to have one at the very end. So what we're doing now, going on to row 2, is going to be part of our pattern repeat. Okay, so in order to go into row 2, we're going to chain 3. And then you're going to turn your work. And this is where we're going to create the design part of our pattern. So we're using the X's and O's stitch, or the X stitch as many would call it. So what we're going to do is we're going to skip 1 stitch. Now I say 1 because this stitch technically has already been worked. That is the purpose of this chain 3. It represents 1 double crochet. So sometimes people would say skip 2 stitches. They also include this one. So I just like to clarify that this one has already been worked into, so I'm skipping 1 and I'm going into what would be the 3rd stitch. Into that stitch, we're going to do a double crochet. So you yarn over, insert your hook, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through the first 2, and yarn over, pull through the second 2. Okay, so you'll notice that one or the other is leaning, and that is exactly what we want. After that, you're going to chain 1, and now, remember our very first stitch that I said we're not counting? We're actually going to go back into it. So we are going to work a double crochet back into this very first stitch, the one that shares the stitch with the chain 3. So you want to yarn over, and what you want to do is once you find that stitch, you're just going to sneak in behind and come in through that stitch from behind. Okay, hopefully you can see that. Then we'll yarn over, and you're just going to pull your loop through, and you'll finish your double crochet as usual. So you'll yarn over and pull through the first 2, maybe a little bit finicky, and then yarn over and pull through the next 2. Okay, if you've done that, your work will look like that. So you can see it's created an X. Okay, and that is why it's important to do that chain 1 in between the 2. Now this very first one might be hard to kind of see where we're going with this. So I'm going to do a few more with you, and hopefully it will make more sense. So this is going to be row 2, and this is what we're going to do all the way to the end of our row. So now what we're going to do is we're going to skip the next 2. So I never count the one I've just worked into now. I skip 1, 2, and into the 3rd, I'm going to work a double crochet. Now, at the beginning here, I actually did use the very first stitch. We only do that at the very beginning, okay? So from here on out, when we say skip 2, we really mean the next 2, and we'll work into the 3rd. And that's why we needed multiples of 3. So we'll yarn over, insert into that 3rd stitch, and work a double crochet. You're going to chain 1 after that. Notice how I'm keeping it really relaxed. Now I'm going to do another double crochet, but I'm going to go back into the first stitch I skipped. So technically there are 2 empty stitches between my last stitch and the one I just did. I want to go back to the very first stitch I skipped. So we're going to leave that one empty. So back into the very first stitch, I go sneak in from behind, yarn over and pull through, and sometimes I just jiggle my work around so that it makes it easier. And then I finish the double crochet as usual. Okay, so again, if I just lay this flat like this, you can see where the fronts of the X's are happening, and if I turn over my work, you can see that's the back of the X. Okay, now some people will do this stitch using the treble crochet so that you can see a lot more of the spacing in between. I chose to do it with the double crochet stitch because I specifically wanted them to sit a little bit more snuggled into each other so that this can stay a nice and cozy sweater. Okay, so I'll do that one more time with you guys. We are now going to skip the next 2 stitches. So you see this stitch has been worked. We don't count that. We skip 1, we skip 2, and into this one, we're going to work a double crochet. Whoops. There we go. And I always keep it extra relaxed on this one because we're going across a few stitches. And then we chain 1. And we're going to come back to the first skipped stitch. So you can see this is the 3rd one we worked into. That's the 2nd one we skipped. This is the 1st one. So we're going to work into that one. We're going to just sneak in from behind. See, normally we'd go in the front. We're going to sneak in from behind. Yarn over. And I just turn my work a little bit to make it easier to pull that loop through. Sometimes it's a little testy. There we go. And then I finish the double crochet as usual. Okay? So skip 2, double crochet in the 3rd, chain 1, then go back to the first skipped stitch and double crochet. So that chain 1, hopefully you can see that, will create the stitch, the space at the top of the stitch. Now, we're going to do this all the way to the end of your row. Okay, so all we're doing is a row of X's all the way across. Okay, and once you finish the row, you can start to see that it'll start taking shape. So this is row 2, but it's the beginning of our repeat of the pattern for this sweater. So off you go, and I'll meet you at the end. All right, so the end of my row I'm coming up to, and I have 3 stitches left over. So what I'm going to do is I've just worked my last X. I'm going to work 1 more. I'm going to skip the next 2 stitches. I'm going to skip 1, 2, and into that last one, which is the top of that chain 2. Remember when we did that chain 2 at the very beginning? So we are going to do a double crochet into that, really relaxed, chain 1, and then I'm going to come back to the first of the 2 that were skipped, and I'm just going to work into the back, and I'm going to work that 2nd double crochet to create the X. Okay, so we've now worked into all of our stitches, but we need to flank each side with a double crochet. So remember at the very beginning here, we had a chain 3, but then we went back and we worked into the base of that stitch right away. Well, that chain 3 represents a double crochet. That acts as like a posting or an edging to our work. So we'll always have a double crochet. Sometimes it's a chain 3. But it represents the height of a double crochet. So we always have a double crochet at the beginning and at the end of the X's, okay? So even though we've already worked into our last stitch, we're going to go into that same stitch again, and we're going to work our final double crochet, and that's what's going to create the anchoring of our work, okay? Just like that. So now that edge is finished. So this is row 1 of our repeat. And so see, the X's are really snuggled in. And what I love about using the double crochet stitch is that it's just kind of creating this really cushy, cozy feel. And I just love that. Okay, let's go on to round 2 and 3 of our repeat. So what we're going to do is we're going to chain 1 and turn our work. For row 2, we're going to go back to using half double crochet stitches. And what we're going to do is we're going to now work into the back loops of our stitches, okay? So now what we're going to do is we're going to chain 2 and turn our work. So for row 2 of our repeat of the pattern, we're going to go back to working half double crochets. And so we're going to go back into working into the stitches. Now, I am not going to work into this stitch because this is the base of the chain 2. So that means it belongs to this stitch, and the chain 2 will represent the height of a half double crochet. So we're not going to to stitch into that. We're going to go into the very next stitch and place a half double crochet into that stitch there. Okay. Now the next stitch would have been the chain 1 of our X. And I'm going to leave it completely up to you if you would like to work into that stitch or just into the space. I am just going to work into the spaces, and I kind of like that idea because then it really will help differentiate a little bit of that X shape just by a bit. Okay, so essentially what you're going to notice is you're going to work into 2 stitches in the half double crochet, and then you're going to come across the chain 1, and you can either go into the chain or you can go into the space, and that's a personal preference. However you like the look it's creating, it's completely up to you. And I'm just going to do a few of these so that you can get a gist of how it looks. So I'm going into the spaces, that's the chain 1. And of course the half double is also always yarning first, yarning over, insert, pulling through, and then pulling through all 3. Okay, so if I turn my work over, it's going to look something like this. So it's just kind of creating this nice little snuggle effect into the X's. So technically my X stitch would look like this. Now because the upward leaning cross to the left is always the one in front, it just looks like a bunch of slanted stitches, which is just as fine for me as well. So that's the half double crochet row that's going to go on the top. Now remember that our duster cardigan is going to drape this way, so we're actually working across the back from one side to the other of our back panel. Okay, so this is all we're going to do for row 2. So do that all the way to the end, and remember you should still have the same stitch count you had when you first started. So at the end of your X's, for example, for me I still had 94 stitches, and now that I'm doing 1 half double crochet into each stitch and each chain 1 space, I should still end up with 94 stitches. Okay, I just wanted to address something real quick before you all got too far ahead. When you're coming to the end of your X's row, I just wanted to show you something a little quick. And you may notice that as you work further and further rows, if you don't address what I'm going to talk about at the very beginning, you're going to notice that your work will kind of dip down a bit. And it's because we do inadvertently add an extra stitch when we do our chain 1 in between at the very beginning. So I'm just going to show you how to counterbalance that. And it's just something that happens at the beginning just because of the way the stitches worked in our beginning number of chains. So I'm just coming up to my very last X's row here. And this will happen at the end of you creating your X row. So I'm just going to yarn over. And again, I'm going to find the 3rd stitch, 1, 2, and 3. And you have to be really aware that this is not the top of the chain 3 at the end. So I just want to make that clear. So you're going to find your 1, 2, 3. You're going to insert your hook and create your double crochet as you have been. You will chain 1 and then go back to that very first stitch you skipped, just like you've been doing. And so at the beginning of the row, we share a stitch with the final or the first post and the X. First stitch of the X, but at the end we do not, and that's why we had that extra stitch at the end. So you're just going to find your chain 2 from the previous row, and you just want to find the top of that stitch. So it's right there. Now, because this is not what gives you the extra stitch, because remember we counted that in to our foundation chain row. It is the chain 1 at the end here that tends to do it. Okay, so here's what you're going to do every time you finish an X row to begin the next row. You will still chain 2 and turn your work. And so normally we've been skipping this stitch because it belongs to chain 2 and working into that one. But what we want to do is actually skip that one entirely. So you're going to skip 2 and you're going to work right away into the space of the X. And this rebalances out our stitch count. So you'll have this, sorry guys, the lighting is funny. You'll have the stitch from the one you just created, and then you'll have the extra stitch, not extra stitch, but the end stitch from your chain 2. Do not worry the fact that we skipped this one, because remember we added an extra stitch, so this rebalances everything. If that doesn't make any sense to you, don't worry about it. Just follow these instructions and you'll be a-okay. So now we're back to our row where we're just inserting 1 half double crochet into each stitch. See, I do go, from here on out, I do go into each and every single stitch and chain 1 space. It's just at the beginning of that first row coming out of your X's. That's the only thing you want to keep in mind. Other than that, you're good to go. So go ahead and finish your row 2, and I'm going to meet you at the end and talk about row 3. Okay, so this is the end of row 2, and I want to find the top of that chain 3 here. So that was my last official stitch. So there's my top of my chain 3 there. So I'm just going to put my last half double crochet into that stitch. And then if you're ever uncertain, just go back and count, and you should have the same number of stitches. So I know that I have my 94 rows. So this is the front of my work, okay? So where we did our X's going this way, that's the front of our work. We just did a half double crochet coming all the way back along the back of our work. We're going to turn our work over again, and now we're going to go into row 3 of our repeat, and we are going to, we're going to chain 2 and then turn our work to go into row 3. Now we're going to do another row of half double crochets, but here's what's different. Instead of working into the full stitch, we're going to work into the back loops only. Now this chain 2 counts as a half double crochet, so I will not be going into this first stitch here. This belongs to the bottom of this. So I'm going to go into the next stitch, and I'm going to turn my work so you can see where the V's are there. I'm going to work a half double crochet into the back loop. So just think of going down into the center of the stitch, and just resolve your half double crochet as usual. Okay, and what that does is that leaves the front loop and the front bottom loop pushed forward, and it just creates this really pretty knit look, which is what we want to do to nestle nicely in between our X rows. Okay, and that is how we're going to be able to tell the front and back of our work from here on out. Okay, so I'm just doing a few more really quickly, just so you can see the effect. Okay, so there you go. So you can see that the bottom of that stitch is being pushed forward, which now just kind of creates a really nice frame for our X row. Okay, so go ahead and do that all the way to the end of the round, and I'll meet you at the end for one more row. Sorry, I've been working on another project that's working in the rounds, so I keep saying rounds, but one more row of our repeat. So for now, 1 half double crochet into each of the back loops of each stitch. And this is row 3 of our pattern. Okay, Okay, I've got one more stitch here that I'm working into the back loop. And now I've got that chain 2, remember? So I'm just going to work into that, the top of that chain 2 as usual, and work a half double crochet. Okay, so at the end of round 3, you've got something that looks like this. So you can see how it just kind of pushed the bottom of these stitches forward, which is just a really nice way to frame in our X's. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to chain 2 again, and we're going to move on to row 4, which is the last of our repeat of this pattern. We're now going to continue on doing the half double crochet again. However, this time we are going to work into the bottom front loops. So here's the regular tops of your loops. The back loop is the one furthest away from you. The front loop is the one closest to you. And then the front bottom loop is this one down here. And those are the loops we're going to be working into. So remember, now we're working across the back side of our work again. So we need to get across so we can start our X's again. So we're going to yarn over. And now I never go into this very first stitch once I've chained 2 because this belongs to this chain 2. So I don't want to stitch into that. So the tops of my stitches are here. So I'm just going to turn over and the bottom front loop is right there. So I'm just going to nuzzle my hook just underneath there. I'm going to help it along and I'm going to nuzzle it right under so it comes up through there. And then I will just do a half double crochet as usual. Okay, don't worry that it looks like it's stretching the loop out. It will all settle in once you do a few more of these. So we're going to do that again. We'll yarn over like usual for a half double crochet. We're going to find the bottom front loop here. And if you're ever unsure, just kind of turn your work so you can see those are the V's. And then I just turn it to the side. There's like a side V here. You just nestle it under that bottom loop so it pokes through. Okay. You pull through all 3. I'm going to do that again, yarn over. So there's the top of my stitch, and this is the side of it, and here's the bottom. Once you work a few of these, it'll be much easier to see them as you go along. Okay, so again, bottom front loop. And as always, keep them nice and relaxed. Bottom front loop. Okay, so from the back of your work it's looking like that. But now when I turn my work over, so you can see now by working the bottom front loops on this side, it continued with the fashion of pushing these stitches forward, which creates that beautiful knit effect. So that is what we're going to do all the way to the end. And then we're just going to begin by repeating our row 1 again, which is our X stitch. Okay, so continue from here to the end, working into the front bottom loops only, using a half double crochet stitch. And I'll meet you at the end of row 4. Okay, and I am coming up to my last front bottom loop here. And now I've got this chain 2. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're just going to find the top of that chain 2 and we're just going to work into it as usual. Just like that. Okay, so that squares off our row 4 of our pattern. Oh, I just love how that texture is coming out. So this is our pattern, rows 1 through 4. Okay, so see, we worked into the back front loops coming back, and it just creates this beautiful ridge. Now, this ridge here will get nestled into our X rows. So row 1 is our X stitch. Row 2 is just a simple row of regular half double crochets into each stitch. Now in the chain 1 spaces, I just went into the space. You can go directly into the stitch if you like. Row 3 is half double crochets into the back loops only. Okay, and then row 4 is half double crochets into the front bottom loops. So we're using, there's 3 rows here where we use half double crochets, but each row we're using them in a slightly different way. And this is what I love about using basic stitches, but showing you how you can create a really intricate and advanced looking pattern. So now all we're going to do is we're going to go back to row 1 and repeat. And so we're going to go row 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way until you get the width of your panel that you desire. And I'm going to start you off again going back into row 1, but I just want to chat quickly about the width of my cardigan. So I am going to make mine for approximately a size medium to a large. I generally sit somewhere in those two, in that range, depending on the style of the garment. Now, I am 16 inches from shoulder to shoulder. I am going to make my width 20 inches, and that is because I want the cardigan to sit nice and loose and drape over my shoulders for the armholes, okay? So I'm a medium to large, so you might want to do yours anywhere from 22. So I'm doing 22 because I want it to drape nicely. So you can do yours anywhere from 22 to maybe 24 inches. If you are more of a small to medium size, you might be like 14 inches from shoulder to shoulder. So I would do, and if you want yours to drape a little bit more like I'm doing mine, I might do yours anywhere from 18 to 22 inches, depending on how much drape you like. So the best thing to do is to work across, and once you get to, once I get to about, so I'm 16, once I get to about 18 inches, I'm going to kind of reevaluate again. And then if I still feel like I want my 20 inches, I'm going to continue on to 20 inches. And at the end of the day, it's not a big deal. Even if you go too wide and you don't like it, guess what? You can just pull it out. It's not a big deal. So for me, from a medium to a large size, I am going to create a panel that is going to be 20 inches wide. Okay, so for now, I'm going to get you started again on row 1 just to kind of remind you of how we go. So I'm going to begin with chaining 3 and turning my work. So now we're going to go back to working double crochet stitches. So I'm not going to work into this stitch because this belongs to my chain 3. So I'm going to go into, I'm going to skip 1 and into the 3rd stitch from the end. So 1, which belongs here, 2 and 3. I'm going to yarn over and insert a double crochet stitch. Then I will chain 1, and now I'm going to go back into that very first stitch, pull through, just like that. Okay, and the first one always feels a bit wonky because it's loose all by itself. Okay, that's your first X. And then we continue on to the next one. And so from here on out, we always skip 2. So 1, 2, into the 3rd, we do our next double crochet, keeping it relaxed. I'm going to chain 1 and then go back to the first of the 2 that were skipped. And you can always, if you're ever unsure, just check out the last one that was worked, and it's always the one beside it. Okay, and then I'm going to insert from behind and then resolve the double crochet stitch. Okay, so there you have it. Now we're back to doing our X's, okay? So I am going to set you loose here. This will take you a little while. So put on a good Netflix show or something and work the length, which actually is the width of your back panel. And I will meet back up with you when I've finished my panel. Okay guys, so I have finished my back panel and it looks something like this. Now I have to say that it was a little bit challenging keeping these side edges straight because it is easy to add an extra stitch here when we finished our X row. So when we start the side panels here, and I'm just going to get to in a second, I'm just going to explain one little thing that you should be careful of so that it helps your edges to stay straighter. And in fact, I had about 3/4 of this done, and then I had to unravel it all because it was just drooping so much on one side. So one little note I'm going to make for you to help you keep the edges fairly straight. And I'm going to talk about that as we go on to the two side panels. So this is the back panel, and this is the right side facing out. So you can see that the ribbing there shows up beautifully, and the X stitches are nestled in there. So what we're going to do, and by the way, I ended up doing 24 inches across. So I know originally I had said I was going to stop at about 18 or 20, but then I decided that I really wanted my cardigan to kind of be slouchy and droopy, so I wanted them to go beyond my shoulders. So I have 24 inches across, and my repeat, I did my repeat 13 times, okay? So we've got the X, the back loops, and then the front bottom loops, and then we repeated that 13 times, and in my last row, I just did one single row of half double crochets, and that is meant to be the anchoring. So remember, we only did one row of half double crochets at the start, and we want to finish with one row of half double crochets at the end. And when we're sewing our pieces together, it'll make more sense. Okay, let's talk about our side panels. Okay, so this is my back panel that's been finished. And this is one of my side panels. And I'm going to tell you a funny little story. I had done the full back panel and the first side panel, and then I was realizing I was having those edging issues. See how nice that edge is? It's because I did that little technique. I actually undid this whole panel. And so we've got about 13 repeats, I believe, of our pattern row to give me the width across that I want for my back panel. I know many of you would groan and grunt, and I would too, but I am now very happy that I did so because I have a much more uniform edge. So you're going to finish, once you finish your back panel, you are going to follow the exact same instructions and do your two front side panels. So I've already done one here, and I haven't snipped it off because, again, I just wanted to make sure that my edges just sat nicely along with each other, okay? And they follow nicely down here, and they match up fairly decently at the bottom. So now I'm super happy. So I am just finishing up my second front panel, and then we are going to talk about, so what we're going to do is we're going to line them up. So make sure that you lay your work out. If you're ever kind of curious what's happening, what's going on with the edges, it's really good to do things like that. Lay it out, see how they look. So this is roughly what it's going to look like. So you can see this is the opening for the front, and it's going to look like that. So it's pretty good. So go ahead, finish your panels, the back panel, the two front side panels. For the front side panel, I repeated the pattern 5 times. So that means I had the X appear 5 times, and I did finish with the 3 rows of half double crochets. Remember, the first row is regular half doubles, the second row is half doubles in the back loop, and the third row is half doubles in the front bottom loop. So if there's anything you're unclear about, just go back and watch again the beginning of the tutorial, these 3 panels are done exactly the same. Okay, gang, I'm setting you loose, and then I'll meet you back here when I'm finished my last panel. Okay, so here we go. We've got all of our panels done, and I'm so happy with how it came out. Now, actually, what you're looking at is the wrong side facing out. So this is the right side. Here you can see kind of where the X's are and a little bit of that fantastic ribbing technique. I just love how that came out. Now, this does have a bit of weight to it, and which is why I love it. So this is, but it's super soft and perfecto for winter time. So it's a great accent to add on to things. Just gives you that little bit of extra weight that you might need to keep you warm. And oh, actually, you know what? This is the wrong side. So what you want to do, I'm just going to fix that, but I'm going to explain something to you. So you've got the back panel and you've got the 2 side panels. What you want to do is you want to have the wrong side facing out, like you want to have all the right sides facing towards each other. So in reality, this is the side that should be facing, because see my side panels, my right sides are facing down. And the reason why we want that is because we are now going to sew the top edges together. So you can see I've already pinned them. So at this point, once you have the 3 panels done, pin them along the top, starting from the edge, and then try it on. So for me, I'm very happy with it. This actually droops over my shoulder. So my shoulder stops about here, which gives it this nice drape. And that's what I want. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make sure that my right sides are facing towards each other. And then I'm just going to come back and talk to you about sewing up our top seams. Okay, so I actually took all the pins out. I only had the pins in so I could try it on, so you don't really need them there. But another thing you want to make sure that you pay attention to, so you can see this is the right side, and this is the right side, so I want to turn them to face each other. And I think I did discuss the fact that anytime you're finished a panel, you want to finish, at least the back panel, we finished on a 1 row of half double crochets. Actually, I think I missed that. I may have talked about it in the back panel, so you can see right here I only have 1 row of half double crochets because we want to match that up with the fact that we only did 1 row at the beginning of our work. So we started this side panel the same way. So I'm just going to turn this over this way. And so now we ended the back panel with 1 row after the X's. Hopefully you can see that. And we're matching up, so I made sure, again, right side is facing to right side. So the 2 side panels, we ended with the half double crochet rows, the 3 rows there. For the side panels, we want these extra rows to be towards the collar, we're going to call it. So that's why I made sure that these, basically it's a chain 1 row is ending up here, okay? So now I have the other side panel, so the right side's facing up. So you see how our first rows of X's are right there, and I only had 1 row of half double crochets. When I came up to the edge, see, I finished it. Oops, that's the back side. There we go. See, I finished it with the ribbing effect, or the knit effect. So this side, so I have the right side facing down, is going to be towards the center, just like that. And then I'm going to match this up. Now, see, with this panel, I did leave a tail right about here because I'm going to use this to sew in my end. So that means that this is going to be my top. And I will need to cut. I'll just have to weave those in. Okay? So I'm actually going to start over here with the side that has a short tail, or a long tail I should say, and I'm just going to briefly take you through how we're going to sew up the top seams. So this is going to run around your shoulders, okay? Actually, you know what I'm going to do? And this is what I recommend anyone do. I had cut this tail long, but in reality, this is the inside, this is the outside facing out. It is always best to start sewing from the outside corner in. It's way easier to kind of like gauge your your evenness of it. Again, you can actually just pin it down, but this is what I recommend you do just to keep things uniform. So that's what I'm going to do. Okay, I got my scissors here. I know some people are thinking, Karen, you are making this a bit more complicated than it needs to be, but you know, these are the things that you work out as you go. You kind of see what works for you, what doesn't work for you. So I'm just going to leave a bit of a tail so I can sew that in afterwards. I'm going to use this same yarn. And it's pretty straightforward. I'm sure at some point all of us have had to, even if you have absolutely no sewing skills, at some point I think we've all had to sew at least a button on, or I know I've had to sew some socks in my day. But in any case, it's not difficult at all. So we want to make sure that we line up the top two corners here. Okay, so this is the foundation chain row of my back panel. So I know, so there's my chain 2. So that's my first stitch right there. So I'm just going to insert my hook. Now I want to try and make sure that I have 2 loops here just to give it a little bit of extra fortification. This one is easy to find because this is where we began our work. So we're just going to insert our needle there. And again, I want to maybe pick up another loop as well. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to pull this through and tie a knot here. And in fact, I'm going to tie it to this tail as well. And then back to this one. I love making sure everything is nice and secure. And then we're just going to weave in those ends afterwards. At this point, we just want to go, now, these are the sides of stitches. So you know what I say, stop, take a look at it, put it down, see how you like it, and just pack your patience, basically. So we just want to make sure that everything lines up nicely here. So, and in some ways, this might be good actually where you can put a pin just to give you, whoops, did I lose a, oh, there it is. Just to give you some guidance. So let me just back that up here. So see where these ridges are? See where these ridges are? You can at least line this up with the ridge here. So actually, let me open this up here. So see, this is meant to line up like that, okay? So we want this ridge to line up with this ridge. So I'm just going to take in the center here, sorry, that was out of frame, and I'm going to line it up with this guy, okay, so that they face each other. Then I'm going to put a pin here. And this will just kind of help you gauge that you are seaming it up fairly evenly. Okay, and so that's seamed up. So now the next ridge is here. So I call these the ridges. I'm going to match it up with the next one here because they should be the same distance apart. And then I just pin those together. Okay, and then my next ridge is here. So I just kind of hold between those two, and the next ridge is here. So I'm just going to pin those two together. This just helps me, whoops, there we go. So somewhat even. So it gives me a little bit of a guide. This gets awkward once it's really big like this. So sorry I can't give you a better view. All right, so now I'm back to my corners. So I'm just going to do the best that I can to make sure that I insert and match up my front to my back, or in this case, I'm working the back panel to the front. So I am going to pick up a couple loops here. So I want to make sure there's at least 2 on here, and then I'm going to match it up with the panel right across the way here. And I really want to try and pick up a couple. And then just feed that through. And I'm not too worried about these guys right now. I'm going to weave those in afterwards. I don't want to. So I'm going to go from front to back. You can go from back to front, whatever works for you. Just most importantly, you want to match them up. So my next kind of spot is there. And my next spot is here. Now you want to watch too, because sometimes you're going to come across your chain 3s from your X's and O's stitch. So it's easy to just go, like this is a great example right here. It's easy to just kind of go in there. The only thing I don't like about that is it tends to create a gap because it will sit and stretch. I'd rather you go in to the stitch, nuzzle it inside the stitch or within the stitch, just to kind of give it a little bit more of a uniform look. And as always, just do your best. Okay, so again, I'm going to go into this next area here that's got a couple loops here, and I'm going to match it up there. So I can see as I get close to the safety pin, see it helps to keep it even. Sometimes it would accidentally bunch in like that, and by placing your pins or stitch markers will work as well. It just helps it stay in place. So that's all we're going to do. So I'm going to do another one here. I'm going to again try to always pick up one and then a second loop for extra fortification, and then pull through. Okay, so I've done a few here, and so just to show you, if I turn that over, see, it's going to be sewn together and no one is the wiser. Love that. Just blends in really nicely. So my darlings, this is the job I'm going to give you now. This may take you a little while only because it just takes a little bit of concentration. You can definitely, you know, do a Netflix night for sure, but you're definitely going to be spending a bit more time looking down. So be patient, go slowly, make sure your sides match up. So you don't have proper stitches to match up. You have the sides of your stitches. And then once you get to the end here, you just want to knot it a couple of times. So you'll weave in, create a knot, maybe sew in your end a bit and knot it somewhere down the way there. A lot of times I'll knot it to this little tail here. Now, at this point, you don't want to create a huge knot because it's going to be bulky in your work. And then we're going to talk about doing the trim and creating a collar. So we don't want to have too much difficulty working around here. But, you know, use your common sense, I guess, and just make sure that it's nicely secured. Once you've done this side, you then want to go and do the other side, okay? Once you've done the top two sides, you can now really put the garment on and walk around and feel it. And then we are going to talk about seaming up the outsides, okay? So you finish that up and I'll meet you back here.